So the big like go-to argument in this discussion from my experience is, hey, like church history, okay? So the from the very beginning of our earliest interpretation of Genesis 1:1, which is the Septuagint, which is not in Hebrew, but we know that they interpreted it as a definite, well, to a lot of scholars at least, they'd say that, hey, we know it's definite because they translated it as NRK, which is, in their opinion, in the beginning. And that is, around 300 AD or 300 BC. And, that's really early. That's their earliest mention of this. So what you're essentially arguing is that, hey, the people that knew Hebrew like super, super early that translated into Greek messed this up. And so did so many other translators and interpreters that they translated it as an independent statement as in the beginning for all this time. So, and how do you interpret, like, what do you do with that information? Specifically, the Septuagint, seem to be translating it differently. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, there's two ways we could look at it. We can try to evaluate what the Greek actually was thinking, what they were translating,
Okay.
or we can ask whether it matters or not. And so I'm actually going to skip to that second one, and because that's more important. Actually, it's
Okay.
just like how much do we actually weigh the evidence of the Septuagint? And of course, like it's important. Those are probably native speakers of biblical Hebrew, so like if anyone should have known what was going on in Genesis 1:1, it should have been them, and that's why you're asking me. And yeah, I don't like to say that they're wrong. I hate to have to say that. I wish that what the way I look at the evidence pointing towards, I wish I could say that that was the traditional view, but it's not. And yeah, what that means, I'm not sure. Is it, you know, here's the thing. Like personally, studying all sorts of topics in the Bible, and hopefully you guys can relate, especially if you're watching Zach's channel. Like you just like to cover these topics that are like controversial and things that go against tradition in a way. I think we've all had an experience if you've studied those types of things where you just find that there are times, wow, where you just like realize something we've got totally wrong in your church tradition. And I've had enough of those moments. Not that I'm looking for them, but I've just realized, hey, there are times where tradition gets something wrong. And I think we all have to recognize that's a possibility, right? And I think we all do. It's just that in practice, when we come across those things, it's really hard to say, hey, I think we got this wrong. Let's fix it. But yeah, I do think there's room for that. And I think this is one of those cases. I think, unfortunately, somehow, I don't know how, tradition, ancient translators got it wrong. And somehow, somehow we're looking at it differently now. So yeah, it's about weighing evidence. Like I said, the whole tiered thing of evidence for me, the Hebrew text is like tier one. That's what matters, and then the Greek text is like lower, right? I think everyone agree that's how it has to be. And so if someone is convinced that the Hebrew Bible evidence points you in this direction, then I think you better go in that direction. I think it would be wrong to look at the evidence of the Septuagint to like override that, right? So yeah, for me, it's just a thing of priorities.
At the same time, other scholars have argued that the Septuagint didn't read Genesis 1:1 as in the beginning, though. Take, for example, Dr. Robert Homestead, who argues arche is used with the article elsewhere in the Septuagint to reference a beginning. This indicates that the Septuagint provides an ambiguous witness at best, and certainly does not support reading Masoretic text Bereshith as definite. For those curious, scholars like Dr. Michael Heiser have argued it would be better interpreted as in the initial period, God created the heavens and the earth in the Septuagint.
Now, if anybody knows Greek, we have NRK. We do not have a definite article there. To be really strict, you would say in beginning or idiomatically to begin with, or when God made the heavens and the, you initially would be a good word. Initially God created. But again, that leaves an incomplete thought. It feels like it's leading somewhere as opposed to being, definite point in time. And in the case of the Septuagint here, they do not have the article.
Well, I think you just summed it up there. It can go either way in Greek as well. Scholars have said, hey, there's the same problem. Like the word can work with the article, it can work without the article. So I guess the reason that's significant is it just tells us that the Greek is also a little bit vague, at least on the article. So the Greek is a bit more clear where they're going with the syntax, with the way the sentence works. But it's a little bit less clear what they thought about the article, because they don't translate it with the article in Greek. But like Homestead pointed out in his second article, there are times where they do say ten archen, so the beginning. So I guess on the article, it's a bit mixed what the Septuagint what they might have thought. But in terms of the sentence level, I think they clearly thought it was one sentence.
I mean, just from my opinion, my research, I think there's actually a lot of reasons to doubt like their ability to understand Hebrew. I mean, there's like a billion different places you can point to where they like completely mess things up, like the Septuagint translators, where you're like, there's no way they could have come to this conclusion like with a sane mind. Like
Yeah,
just
someone was
completely
having
like,
a bad day
yeah,
at the translation
clearly.
office.
Yeah, it was some just really baffling things. But specifically in this instance, we actually do have examples where they mistranslate similar verb construction. So in my last interview where I interviewed on this topic was Dr. Henry's son, and we talked about how Bereshit is supposedly a construct noun, and a lot of people would say, oh, no, you can't have that construct noun next to a finite verb, which is the word bara. You can't have those two types of words next to each other because that just doesn't happen in Hebrew. Well, of course, you can mention a bunch of times where it does happen in Hebrew, but then a lot of people say, okay, well, it's really awkward or it's bad, and like that's why it was never used or very rarely ever used that way. But it's interesting that we actually have examples in the Septuagint where they actually did make the same mistake in other places. And Hosea 1:2, which is like almost everybody in the world agrees, like, hey, Hosea 1:2, that has a construct noun with a finite verb, just like Genesis 1:1 would be under your opinion. And so like it's certainly possible, but in the Septuagint they messed up the translation and they translated it differently than what we know is what it was originally, according to almost nearly every scholar in the world. Additionally, Jeremiah 6:15 and Jeremiah 50:31 also seem to mistranslate the relative clauses. So it seems like, okay, maybe they just had a difficult time with translating relative clauses. But you can also look at other later rabbis, and they mistranslate the same Hebrew construction in a really odd way. Would that be Psalm 81:6 as well as Hosea 1:2? And you can look on my screen for the citation for all that. But it seems like people in ancient times seem to maybe not understand this form of Hebrew construction very well. And maybe that's why they mistranslated Genesis 1:1 in the Septuagint and maybe all these other ancient texts.
Many will be surprised to know the 4th century Jewish Midrashim Mekilta, as well as the later Tanumach Bashemot, claims the Septuagint translators changed the meaning of the first verse.
But yeah, I mean, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, no, you're right. There's all sorts of reasons why a Septuagint translator might have got something wrong. And like you're right, we do have a lot of examples where they do get things wrong. And so we all know that's a possibility. It's just that it just seems really improbable that they would get the first verse wrong, or and even if like what you're proposing, that maybe the specific type of grammatical construction they weren't the best at. I mean, even if that's not very convincing, then the point is there are explanations like that. There's all sorts of possibilities like that, which could explain why they got something wrong. the point, we don't need to come up with the answer of like why they got it wrong. All we have to do is look at the data and give it our best guess. But yeah, I do think the witness of the Septuagint is important, but obviously the evidence in the Hebrew Bible is more important.
And just for other people's information, Targum Onkelos translated it as in former times, so neither translation, but it's kind of like that relative meaning in former times. That's how they translate Genesis 1:1, as well as Rashi and Ibn Ezra also translate Bereshit as in construct.
Right.
Max is arguing here. So, and then next year we'll come back, and after we're experts in Greek, we'll have
Yes.
another conversation just on NRK. All
God
right.
willing.
All right.
Leave it in the comments, Greek nerds.
Yeah, there you go.